Month 2022. I am Jenny Gibbs, Executive Director of the IFPDA and the IFPDA Foundation. Today is our final online-only program, and I'm delighted to report that we have well over 200 registrants. I want to thank all of our online presenters over the past 2 weeks and our thousands of viewers who tuned in for these live programs, all of which will be available on the website of the IFPDA and the IFPDA's YouTube channel. We hope to see many of you in person next week, where we continue our Print Month programming at the IFPDA Print Fair in New York, October 27th to the 30th at the Javits Center. We'll be presenting in-person programs with artists including Derek Adams, Kiki Smith, Hank Willis Thomas, Via Selmans, and Enrique Chagoya, and print curators from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, National Gallery of Art, the British Museum, and many more. Today's program is presented by the Association of Print Scholars under the direction of Elisa Germain and Galina Martalovic. Elisa and Galina will be leading a conversation celebrating 3 decades at Crow's Shadow and looking to the future of Native American printmaking with the team at Crow's Shadow Institute of the Arts, which is located on the Umatilla Indian Reservation near Pendleton, Oregon. A quick word about the APS and our hosts. APS is a group that brings together print curators, collectors, scholars, students, artists, conservators, critics, and gallerists to foster dialogue among its diverse membership and to encourage innovative print scholarship. Elisa is a specialist in modern and contemporary works on paper with a focus on mid-20th century Spain, currently working at the Harvard Art Museums as the Emily Rao Pulitzer Curatorial Fellow in Contemporary Drawings. Galina is a specialist in 19th century European works on paper, currently at work on a book on prints, modernity, and modernism in Russian art. As a reminder, this program is being recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel of the IFPDA as well as our website. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box and we will get to them at the end of the program. And with that, I turn it over very happily to Galina and Elisa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And before we jump in, I do want to say how excited APS is to partner again with IFPDA for their Print Month programming. I'd like to thank the IFPDA for this opportunity, and especially to thank Jenny Gibbs and Sherry Young for all their assistance and heroic behind the scenes efforts. It is no small feat to do what you do, and we are very, very grateful. Elisa and I also want to extend our thanks to the wonderful panelists who will lead today's event. Carl, Judy, Marvin, and Rebecca, thank you for your willingness to come together and share your insights and stories and perspectives on the incredible work of Crow's Shadow Institute for the Arts, Founded in 1992 by artists James Lavadour and Phillip Kashkash, Crow's Shadow Institute of the Arts is the only professional print studio that is housed on an Indian reservation in the US. Over the last 30 years, it has become one of the leading art centers for Native American printmaking, thanks to its prestigious residency program that has hosted artists such as Raven Chacon, Jeffrey Gibson, Wendy Red Star, James Luna, Kay Walkingstick, and Mary Watt, among many, many, many others. Crow's Shadow's editions are held in museum collections such as the Portland Art Museum, the Wellin Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, Library of Congress, Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and again, many, many others. In addition to its work in printmaking, Crow's Shadow has evolved its mission to boast an impressive array of educational, social, and economic development programs, including community-driven workshops for Native and Indigenous traditional arts, such as basket making, beading, and the crafting of horse regalia. And I believe one of those workshops is actually happening at this very moment at Crow's Shadow, which we might hear in the background. And in today's panel, we will hear from our speakers about this rich history and mission, as well as how Crow's Shadow provides an incredible platform for Native artists to connect with the mainstream art world, and for non-Native participants, an avenue for cross-cultural understanding. As for the logistics of today's event, I will introduce our panelists, who will first speak to the foundational history and operations of Crow's Shadow. Then we'll cover the actual experience of its residency program, followed by a discussion of contemporary Indigenous printmaking. Elisa and I will then moderate questions, so please feel free to type in your questions throughout the program in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to address them at the very end. And with that, Carl Davis is the Executive Director of Crow's Shadow Institute of the Arts. He holds an MA from University of Alberta and a BA from Portland State University, both in art history. He has led a number of different arts organizations throughout his career, including serving as coordinator of the Lippman White Galleries at PSU, director of Phillip Gallery in Portland, and president of the Art and Design Graduate Student Association at the University of Alberta. He is a native Oregonian with strong ties to the local and national arts communities. Judith Bauman is the current master printer at Crow's Shadow. She received her MFA in print media from Virginia Commonwealth University and her BFA from Alfred University. In 2015, she completed Tamarind Institute's prestigious professional printer training program, which we actually heard about yesterday, and where Judith focused on the art of collaborative lithography. She is a recipient of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts Professional Fellowship Award in Printmaking. For over a decade, she has taught printmaking to hundreds of students at numerous universities and art institutions, including the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology, and the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Judith specializes in lithography, letterpress, and digital integration in print, and her work has been shown in myriad group and solo exhibitions across the US. Marvin Begay of Navajo Nation is an internationally exhibited printmaker and painter and the Associate Professor of Painting and Printmaking at the University of Oklahoma's School of Visual Arts. As Associate Professor, his research has concentrated on issues of cultural identity, especially the intersection of traditional American Indian culture and pop culture. He has also conducted research in the technical aspects of relief printing and the use of mixed media. His work has been exhibited nationally across the US and internationally, including in New Zealand, Argentina, Paraguay, Italy, Siberia, and Estonia. Marvin is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Oklahoma Visual Artists Coalition Fellowship and Best of Classification and Graphics in 2019 Santa Fe Indian Market, among many others. He has been featured in many publications and is represented by Exhibit C in Oklahoma City. And lastly, Rebecca Dobkins is Curator of Indigenous Art at the Haley Ford Museum of Art and Professor of Anthropology at Willamette University, where she has taught since 1996. She has curated over 24 exhibitions, including many focused on prints from Crow's Shadow, and she's the author of several exhibition-related books, including Crow's Shadow, Institute of the Arts at 25, which was published by Haley Ford Art Museum of Art in 2017. She is a contributor to a forthcoming volume about the history of printmaking at the Institute of American Indian Arts, which is forthcoming in late this year, and it will be called Experimental Expression, Printmaking at IAIA 1963 through 1980. And with that, welcome.
Hello, thank you. I'm Carl. Thank you so much, Elisa and Galina, for inviting us to this panel. I feel honored to be included in this print month with IFPDA and to Jenny's wrangling us in for this event. I'm very thankful for that. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the beginning of Crow's Shadow, the history of it, and Judy will talk a little bit more about the process and collaborative printmaking and a lot of the artists that we work with. I do, if you could give me back the screen, I wanted to show one thing where, so the workshop that's going on right now, this is the basket weaving by Joey Lavadour. So this is an example of the work that he'll be doing and teaching in the class today. So this is his work, and Joey is the brother of Jim Lavadour. So you might hear some things going on while I'm talking, but Crow's Shadow, was started in 1992 by James Lavadour and Phillip Kashkash, really as a place for Native American artists to come together and access arts resources and infrastructure that wasn't entirely accessible outside of the reservation or on the reservation, but was more accessible to artists outside the reservation. So early on, it was a place for professional development, for community-driven workshops, trying things out. And we very early on bought a Ray Trail press, which is kind of a press built by a local Oregonian, and he built presses for print shops all over the Northwest. And that really started the idea of printmaking as the central focus in some ways. Yeah, so if we start with the slides, the idea was that we were kind of a catch-all for things to happen in the community with creativity, with art making. In early 1990s, they received a grant from the USDA, or Rural Economic Development Fund, and that allowed them to build out a better studio and gallery space on the ground floor of the building we're at now. So we are located on the Umatilla Indian Reservation in northeastern Oregon, but we are also primarily located inside a Catholic mission, and you can see the sign there to St. Andrew's Mission. We've been in the same building since founding, with some changes over the years, but in 2001, we hired our first master printer, Frank Jansen, and started the residency program in somewhat of a whim, but it was very quickly became the goal of Crow Shadow. The focus of Crow Shadow was printmaking. The very first edition we ever made was with Edgar Heap of Birds in 2001. It was an 18 color 30 edition print that really kind of spearheaded the focus of what we would be doing for the history. Go ahead and next. So you see the mission. We do kind of a trident of things: the educational, social, and economic. The education is the workshops we offer, traditional arts, but also workshops in the studio and printmaking. The idea of the social aspect is bringing people together. It's the creativity of many people create wonderful things. And in the economic aspect of it too, we as a publisher are developing the prints with the artist in studio, publishing that work, and then offering that work for sale. The artists in the residency program are paid for their time in studio, and then they're sharing in benefits with the print sales. And so through that process, some artists we work with very early in their career who don't have a large market of sellable work. Their art is able to be purchased by museums, collectors across the world, and that helps in some ways spur that economic aspect, but also through other projects that we work on with community, maybe helping a young artist print t-shirts and that they can then sell on their own, things like that. So go ahead and next. So James Lavadour, the founder of Crow Shadow, this is an idea that he's talked about, and we kind of keep this going, the idea that we bring the world to the reservation and the reservation to the world. As mentioned, we're a very unique place on the Umatilla Indian Reservation, only professional print publisher on a reservation in the US. You met last week with the folks at Kingate, so that's another model that we talk about when we're talking about publishing with Native Americans or First Nations peoples. But for the US, it is fairly unique. And so we not trying to keep that quiet, but it is an aspect of our identity that we're that unique. Next. So this is the building that we're located in. It is a 1930s mission schoolhouse. We are in the ground floor, so this is the backside of the building essentially to us. but it is an old stucco building. It's a very mission style, and we're in the idea now at this phase in our history as an organization and where we're at. We are looking to expand to a new building site in the future. This is an ongoing process, but and a big dream of the organization to be moving. Eventually, we would be building our own building, not on the reservation, or not on the, I'm sorry, within the reservation boundaries again, but not on the Catholic mission. Next. So yeah, this is early on in the series, in the history, and Jim on the left there receiving a grant. And you see the first rail trail press on the right. That was our very first press. It has now moved on. It is located with the Hoopa tribe in Northern California. They have that press, and they're trying to restart a printmaking program on their reservation. So it is still history within Native printmaking community. I'm very proud to continue that tradition with a broader community as well. And that was the first classrooms. The building is a mission schoolhouse, and those were the first classrooms where the kind of Crow Shadow started. It still used Sundays for printmaking, screen printing, but it's mostly storage now for us. Go ahead. And 2001 we held this workshop called The Conduit to the Mainstream, and these participants came to interface with each other. The idea of how and where Native American art stood inside a contemporary world, a contemporary mode of making and seeing. And so this group of people really just kind of joined to interface with each other, to talk about these ideas. And you see that list of luminaries from the art world. Some have sadly passed now, but there are still many people within this group that have been back to Crow Shadow multiple times. People like Marie Watt. We really were indebted to Marjorie Devon and Eileen Fody on the early days to help spur the idea of these residency program and what we could be doing for the Native American print community or arts community. Next. And now I'm going to kind of start to turn it over to Judy to talk about the process, but this is our studio as it is now. We do have our litho presses, we have some etching presses, but it is primarily lithography. And so I'm going to turn it over to Judy to start to talk about the residency program itself and that history.
Great. All right. Thank you. So this is our studio now, and you can see in the background on the larger photo our two editioning presses, so our lithographic presses, and we are based off of the idea of Tamarind Institute, who you talked with yesterday. It is a collaborative printing process that we focus on here, and it happens to be in lithography. I've been trained as a lithographer. I do other techniques as well. But since I've been here, I've worked with over 20 artists, and I've published since 2018 over 65 editions and monoprint series in this space. I've had several really wonderful apprentices and assistants and volunteers in the space. My current apprentice assistant is Maggie Middleton, who's a wonderful person to work with, and without her help, we wouldn't be able to do what we do here. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. Marwin Begay was actually my very first collaboration in 2018, and I had known Marwin. I'd already met him from the Evergreen State College. He kind of did some work there through the Longhouse program, and what a joy it was to work with Marwin. And we produced two, I think there were 7 and 8 color lithos, and then a beautiful series of monoprints or monotypes. I believe they were monoprints. Yes, St. Andrew's Paradise. So that just started the ball rolling. You can go ahead and print, Go to the next slide. There we go. So when the artist is here, we're trying to get to a yes. We're trying to get to an approval to print. And then after the artist leaves, we edition the work, which of course means that we make the sellable edition and all of the off tops, the artist proofs and the publishing proofs. We keep 2 impressions for Crow's Shadow, one that we frame and one that goes to the Wellin Museum of Art for safekeeping, our sister institution. The printer gets a print as well as the assistant for the collaboration. And then the artist also gets 2 to 4 impressions as well. Most of our edition sizes are between 18 and 20. Sometimes they can be a little bit lower. It just really depends on the complexity and size. Go ahead and advance. So here are the 2 finished lithos with Marwin. Evening Song has sold out. I believe we have a few impressions left of Columbia River Custodian, but these really set the bar for my work at Crow's Shadow. And as the collaborating printer, I really try to challenge myself and challenge the artists that I work with to make complex works of art. Go ahead and advance. Here's James Lavadour. So this is the first edition that I worked with Jim on, and it was really just this beautiful series of color studies. And we proofed and proofed and proofed to try to get to these impressions that we then pulled as the yeses, the approvals to print. And it was a really laborious process, but these prints were absolutely gorgeous. And I think he was pretty thrilled with them. Go ahead and advance. Natalie Ball was here in 2019, excuse me, and then signed her proofs. These were the last prints that I printed on our hand crank direct press before we got our brand new motorized tackage press, which is really a game changer as well. And working with Natalie was such a thrill. We actually had her back this past May. We're going to start to edition some new impressions in just a couple weeks. Again, just truly a joy to work with. Go ahead and advance. And these are her finished prints. So they had digital Shinkole elements on them. We printed them on, I believe, mulberry, and then hand tore them to size using jigs. These were really beautiful graphic images to print. And you know, it helps when you start to build a relationship with the artist and gain trust, the artist's trust to make marks and to have some sway and color and to really kind of move them through the process. And so when she was here this past May, the process was much more streamlined. Go ahead, next. This is Yadika Star Fields. He was here in 2019, Kaila Farrell Smith, 2018. Monotypes and monoprints are a great way for artists to make a series in studio that basically as soon as they are done with the residency and we can photograph them and get them on our website, they're available to sell. So instead of waiting for 6 to 8 months for us to edition their work, they have a body of work that's immediately published upon their completion of the residency. And that has proved successful for many artists. Next. Wendy Red Star was here in 2020. We kept on rolling through the pandemic. It really didn't slow us up at all. In fact, it allowed us to focus more on our residencies with artists to make complicated works. And so when Wendy was here, we made these 3 beautiful pieces, and upon their release, they pretty much sold out, I think, in 3 days, which was amazing and a really wonderful experience. Go ahead, next. This was truly very, very team-oriented print to make. We had to hire in another printer to help us apply all the Shinkole elements and tear them all out. Again, these are digital elements on, I believe these are also a mulberry paper, I forget which one. But the background is all lithographs. The colors are just amazing and beautiful. It's got a pattern that Maggie helped Wendy envision in the background with her ancestors' names throughout. Go ahead, next. And here are those resulting prints. They're really wonderful. I'm super proud of how these turned out. Go ahead next. Emily Arthur was here in 2021, as was John Hitchcock in the last slides. These prints were just released earlier this year, and really lovely work. Again, a joy to work with. You can go next. I don't want to run over my time. And here we are editioning the works. This is the finished piece. It looks a little bit pixelated on your screen, but if you go to our website, you can see it in a better resolution. Go ahead next. John Hitchcock, these bright, wonderful, amazing works of art based on horse masks and then swallowtail birds. Kind of, these came almost directly out of his sketchbooks. He was working with these really highly pigmented markers, and we try to emulate that kind of pop of color with these works. So big blends, big color pops, really beautiful work. He serenaded us nightly with his guitar work. Go ahead next. And then these are the prints that we just again published earlier this year. Next. And then Marwin. Marwin, you can talk about your experience.
Thank you. Jag är kvasten jag Marwin begegen det jag det shit needs not Jenny Bussing twits of me that's it the best gen a national och alltså det nästan welcome. That was just me doing my cultural protocol to introduce myself. My name is Marwin Begay, and I'm a printmaker. I teach at the University of Oklahoma. I teach printmaking and painting, more experimental kind of painting. And anyway, I'll just talk about my experience as an artist, as a printmaker, kind of coming into the Crow Shadow Institute. So when I next slide, please. When I first heard about Crow Shadow, when all those when all those artists kind of gathered together, I think that was a big. I thought that was a big kind of game changer, and just knowing a lot of the artists who I have admired throughout the years have kind of gone through and collaborated there, and I was really honored to be asked to come and do the collaboration. And so with the image that you see here, I was coming off of artist in residency at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, and there I was trying to kind of enlarge my sketchbook with backgrounds and kind of layering and kind of trying to prepare for my collaboration in at Crow Shadow. Next, please. So as a Native person, you know, throughout my life, I've been taught, and you know, to kind of have a connection with the land and connection with your surroundings where you're at, so that you could obey by their laws that with the caretakers of the land. So I started looking at some design elements, and next please, and going to their cultural center, and just really kind of trying to get a feel of the land. And this was the first time I was in Oregon, so I was every morning I'd kind of go out and kind of walk around and see what I could include into my prints. Next, please. So, you know, as a printmaker, coming into the situation, it was like a resort, you know, like a printmaking resort, right? Because you have someone who is printing for you, someone who is mixing your inks, and someone who is doing all the work for you. And if you're a professor, or if you teach printmaking and you're in the studio yourself, you have to do all of that. And so I really felt kind of privileged to watch it all happen. And so one of the I don't know if it's a bad habit or a good habit that I have is when I go to a print studio, I start looking in drawers, and I start, you know, just kind of curious on what what how things are stored, and kind of taking in information, and how I can kind of take that back to my studios. And so, I was all over the place there. And next slide, please. So these are just the some of the imagery that I've come up with. And coming from a Native community that is really based in oral history, a friend of mine, Lillian Pitt, told me this story when she heard that I had gotten accepted to Crow Shadow. She told me a story. She's Wasco, and she relayed a story to me about the condor, and how her people were at one point in their history, they were starving, and they couldn't find food, and so they offered up prayers to the eagle, and the condor kind of came to them and said, "Hey, I heard your prayers, and I know there is a place, and I will show Eagle where there is a food source, and he will kind of bring you back to where there is food." And so that story kind of stuck in my mind, and I was thinking about the Columbia River, the flow of the river, and you'll see some basket designs in there. You'll see the weave of the basket kind of enlarged, and of course there are stars. And you'll see in the later slides where the condor, there's an underlayering of the condor that has stars in it, and those stars to me kind of represent that the knowledge of the constellations. And so I tried to include that story. So right out of the gate, I knew what I was going to do with this first piece. Next slide, please. And so I was also impressed by where the complex is there. They're close to a little stream, and so I was noticing just a bunch of birds and just the wildlife, because and so that's how I got these monoprints, just to kind of honor them, and just to kind of just to kind of try to record the awesome feelings that I had when I was there. Next slide, please. And this is my ride home, just as I finish my residency, as I'm flying from Pendleton to Portland. This was very much the scenery, and these two ladies kind of sending me off to kind of go back home and try to really to think about what I've learned just by watching Judith's work, being there on the reservation, and kind of just the whole surroundings was really impactful for me. Next slide, please. And so these are just the two pieces again, and the piece that on the right with the evening song, that print is kind of formulated from the walks that I had, and the beautiful sunsets. They were just incredible. So that's where that kind of blend comes in. And there in the back of the bird, there's a very stylized river, very geometric, and and again, really kind of when I first got to Portland, something had happened to the plane to get to Pendleton, so I ended up driving, and that was really the best thing that ever happened, because I got to experience driving out, I think it's 2 hours, and just absorbing and thinking about the artists who I've met throughout the years, who come from who live by, or who have grown up by the river, and just really seeing like their colors that they use in their compositions. And it was very enlightening, because I would look back in the mirror, and I would see like the mountain and just the coloration. I'll be like, oh, that's where James Lavadour gets that, and it was very eye-opening for me. Yeah, and so it was just a big honor for me to be a part of the program, and to just to be mentioned with the artists who have kind of come through is a really big honor. So that's all I have. So I'm going to pass it on to Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Dopkins, and if we could have the next slide. I'd like to talk about the why I think Crow Shadow is so well poised for a strong future, and I want to ground that in some of the things of the past. I love that Marwin called Crow Shadow a resort for printmakers and for artists. I also think of it as a resort for curators and print scholars, because it's such a wonderful place. And I want to start with positioning myself and the partnership that my university art museum has with Crow Shadow for about 20 years now. Next slide. We do a couple of things with Crow Shadow. One is that we began working together in the first decade where Crow Shadow had a master printer, Frank Jansen, also trained at Tamarin. And we did a couple of things. One is we started having biennials of Crow Shadow, of work from Crow Shadow, I think beginning in 2006, I'd have to go back and check. And then we became the archival repository for prints at Crow Shadow. And so on our website, you can see all of the lithographs that have been produced at Crow Shadow. Next, please. And so as Crow Shadow approached its 25th anniversary in 2017, we worked with Crow Shadow to curate a major retrospective and a book that you can access through University of Washington Press. And if you move on to the next slide, there's an essay in that book, by the way, that Heather Ottone and I co-authored about the history of Native printmaking, and there's a additional essay about the history of Crow Shadow, specifically by art historian Prudence Roberts, and then a selection of images from each of the 50 artists who at that point had residencies at Crow Shadow. That exhibition traveled, and that's one thing I want to sort of give a shout out to Crow Shadow, that they've done a great job of curating and working with a variety of institutes and galleries and museums in our region and across the country, sending shows to the Museum of the American Indian, and as mentioned before, ending up with work in a variety of museum collections. Next slide, please. So to step back a little bit, and I wanted, in these next series of slides, I want to provide a glimpse of these luminaries of the Native art world who have printed at Crow Shadow, in part to just really communicate how important and how extraordinary this collection is, and a legacy that provides this tremendous foundation for what's to come. And so this is Jim Lavadour working with Frank Jansen back in 2010. And in my backdrop, you can see some of the prints that Jim has done at Crow Shadow over the years. And one thing that I want to really say again is how important Jim has been to Crow Shadow, and how he, on a regular basis, creates prints that are then sold as fundraising instruments for Crow Shadow, and sort of his support, both in time and in talent has been essential to Crow Shadow. Next slide, please. Truman Lowe was among those first artists who came to Crow Shadow. Truman has passed, but this also gives a different view into what artist experience and the community experiences at Crow Shadow. He's working there with Nixiawe Charter School, high school kids from the Umatilla Reservation. Next slide. Marie Watt likes to call herself the poster child of Crow Shadow. She's been in residence many, many times. And for those of you who are familiar with Marie's work, she's become really well known for her blanket stories, her towers of blankets. And she's talked about how her printmaking practice at Crow Shadow gave her a chance to work out some of her visions for her fiber arts work, and also gave her great proximity to Pendleton woolen mills and to lots of blankets and vintage shops. So her work at Crow Shadow is really tremendous, and I can't wait to see what she does with Judy in the future. Next slide. Rick Bartow, who we also have lost, was another poster child of Crow Shadow, had a number of residencies, great collaborations, great individual works. And there is a fund in Rick's name that supports ongoing residencies at Crow Shadow for Native artists. Next slide. Okay, WalkingStick is another tremendous figure in contemporary Native art, especially in the New York art scene, who printed very early on at Crow Shadow, and also, by the way, went to New Zealand with a group of us who took an exhibition to New Zealand of Crow Shadow's work and did printmaking there, kind of as an ambassador of Native arts, but specifically of Crow Shadow. Next slide. Joe Feddersen, I also think of as one of the great Native printmakers, along with Marwin, of course. Joe has printed at Crow Shadow one really important lithographic series, Wyatt View, but has also done a lot of monotype and support of Crow Shadow behind the scenes. And he and Judith also worked together at Evergreen. So he's been a really important figure associated with Crow Shadow over the years. Next. We saw Wendy's recent printmaking at Crow Shadow, but she's been printmaking for a while with Crow Shadow. Next slide, please. And I wanted to show this image because Wendy, like several of the artists, also does traditional arts or customary arts, and she did a fancy shawl workshop with members of the Umatilla Indian Reservation at one of her residencies. Next slide. Jeffrey Gibson was one of the earlier, in the first decade of printmaking at Crow Shadow, was one of the earlier residents there. And if you go to the next slide. Lillian Pitt, who Marwin mentioned, has been to Crow Shadow a number of times, and she works a great deal with images of petroglyphs from the Columbia River region. She in turn has really, her work at Crow, she's an example of someone like Jim talks about, who has brought the reservation to the world through her public art projects, and especially the petroglyphic iconography of the Columbia River Gorge. I think has been, Lillian has really brought that forward. Next slide. James Luna, another luminary who we have lost in the last few years, printed at Crow Shadow. Next slide. Corky Claremont, whose name you may not know of, but who I think of as one of the important elders of Native printmaking, has been to Crow Shadow. He has taught for years, taught printmaking at Salish Kootenai Tribal College in Montana. Next slide. Brenda Mallory, who lives here in Portland, is Cherokee, and has recently won a Hallie Ford Fellowship, and has, like many of these artists, has won Idle Jorg Fellowship, has printed at Crow Shadow. Next, Jim Denamy, Ojibwe, has, we've also lost him. I'm realizing this as we go through, but did wonderful, fabulous prints at Crow Shadow. Next slide. The last of these artists I wanted to mention, although there are many others, is Melanie Yazzie, who is also a really important figure in contemporary printmaking. Like Marwin, has done many workshops and print exchanges, and she was a resident at Crow Shadow in 2012. The next three slides are slides of various traditional arts workshops. And so I just wanted to include these because this is, to me, a really important part of what Crow Shadow does. So next, this is a beading workshop, a cradleboard workshop. And then if you'll go to the next slide, there's also another way in which Crow Shadow provides a forum for the world to come to the reservation. And this is the Leica film animation staff who came to Crow Shadow in 2015 to do a workshop, an animation workshop with young people from the Nix Yahweh Community School. So if you go to the next, I'm just going to close up. And with the last few slides, I wanted to situate Crow Shadow, both its past and its future, in other really important centers of printmaking. So one is the Institute of American Indian Arts that Marwin attended, that Phil Kashkash attended, both of whom did printmaking there. It's been a really important center of printmaking. Next slide. And then in a more diffuse way, the Northwest Coast, especially in British Columbia, but also Puget Sound, has been a really, really important place where Native printmaking, especially silk screen, has been vital in terms of the visibility of Native arts. And then finally, next slide. As you heard recently, the other, I think, really important place to know about North America is Knight Studios in Nunavut, which has an incredible storied history of printmaking since the 50s and works on a co-op model, but has been a way in which Inuit arts has reached the rest of the world. So I'll close there. Next slide. And I just want to say thank you to everyone at Crow Shadow for all of the work that you do and support.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was a really sort of wonderful way to close things out, and we can now have more of a conversation. So if everybody wants to turn their video back on, I just wanted to start with a question about something that really resonated throughout everybody's portion, which was really sort of this notion of community and collaboration that was so important throughout all of your sort of individual perspectives, and also just the multimedia component. So the fact that you have all of these rich sort of workshops consistently going on, really adjacent to the studio, even as we speak. So I just wanted to learn a little bit more about how those multimedia workshops sort of have influenced any of the artists that have come through in their projects. Has a project sort of evolved based on their interaction with the local community and sort of what projects they were working on? Any of you can sort of jump in.
Well, I'll say Marwin is probably the perfect example of that kind of interaction. When he was here, he was looking at those baskets. He went to Muslik to look at the cultural history of the reservation and the peoples here, and didn't try to copy that work, but really try to incorporate and honor that into the prints that he made. So it was really about not direct influence, but about absorbing and being within that mode. I think was really important. So I don't want to speak for Marwan, but I think that was, from my perspective, was a very, kind of the not the goal of Crow Shadow, but it's a process that happens, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, and a unique kind of, part of what the studio can bring to any visiting artist for sure. And oh, sorry, Marwan, go ahead.
Good. I think as an artist and kind of coming through, I think that what was really impressive to me was that how Crow Shadow is incorporated into the community, right? Like I would go to the convenience store, and I would be the odd one, and everyone would already know. They would be like, "Oh, you're a resident at the Crow Shadow, right?" I'm like, "Whoa, how did you know?" And they're like, "Well, you look like you don't belong." So and that to me was really nice. And then also how we went to the graduation of the community school, and just to see the interaction. And so I think the way that Crow Shadow has just been integrated into the community, and to be a part of the community was really important as well. Because when I made that collection visit, it was just like a phone call, and there were people waiting for me at the door, and I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, I think on that note, like something that really sort of stuck out to me as you were talking, Marwan, was also just your role as a teacher, in addition to being an artist, and how impacted and meaningful the experience might have been just because you were surrounded by this sort of community where you could learn yourself, you said, a lot of new things and find new influences and inspiration. I loved your photos of like the nature and the bird's eye view from the plane and the basket. And I think just sort of how did your experience sort of change your interaction with your own students as a teacher of printmaking, or even just your perspective?
Just to kind of listen a little bit more, listen to their stories, and listen to and how that's important, and how and try to get them to get motivated to be a part of a community, either the printmaking community on campus, or a community, to be a part of a community. And I think that the community really informs where what you're thinking and what kind of art that you're making.
Yeah, and the intricate sort of work that you guys have shown in your own work, but also Judith with the pulling the prints and positioning them. I mean, your digital sheen collé that's like a conversation in and of itself. But I'm amazed at how well you guys sort of seem to work together on projects and still innovate. So has there ever been like a particular project where it really was just a tough one to work out, but you're really happy with how it sort of came together in the end? I'm sure there's many.
There really are many. And so again, like every print is a puzzle. And I once heard, I went to a lecture in Pullman, and the people from Durham Press were there, and they were talking about collaboration. And someone mentioned like you make something in the studio, and then you shelve it for a little bit, and then you finally get to edition it, and it's like, oh, how did I do that? And so it's like this rediscovery that happens all the time. And it seems like to go on waves. For a year, like sheen collé was really popular in the studio, and everyone wanted to do sheen collé. And then this year, 2022, has been the year of gold leaf, and we have like a bunch of editions coming out with gold leaf, and
that's exciting.
It is. So, there's always elements of, limitations. Like what is the limitation of the materials? What is the limitation of the studio? What is the limitation of me as a physical human being in the world? So all these things kind of work together. And then within that limitation, like there's also infinite possibilities. So I really try to push artists to do things while they're here that maybe they wouldn't have thought of before, or you know, I like to keep it interesting for myself too, because I'm always learning and I'm always growing as a printer.
Yeah, no, I love that you said all of that. That's really good insight. And Rebecca, I just wanted to sort of turn to you and just sort of talk about the fact that you published that book at the sort of 25th anniversary mark. I wanted to sort of ask you what you've seen over the course of the last 5 years and how the field has kind of changed and evolved. I mean, obviously the field of the arts in general has had a huge shift in so many ways, but for Native American printmaking in particular, I'd love your insight just to sort of what you see is kind of happening in the past 5 years and then the future. Obviously you don't have the crystal ball, but.
Well, I mean, I've been giving this a fair amount of thought, because I was on a panel dealing with other things. And these last 5 years have been like 50, right? Like if you think about the period from 2017 to 22, one, you know, one of the first things that comes to mind is the role of printmaking in activism, right? So like when you think about Standing Rock and how important prints were to communicating that message. But at Crow Shadow specifically, Judith and Judith's presence and sort of the next generation, because up to 2017, the master printmaker was Frank Jansen. And so it was the 25th anniversary in part to, you know, to do that, but it was as the transition was happening. So I think seeing what Judith does differently with printmakers, many things come to mind just at Crow Shadow, but writ large, which is this tremendous burst of color, this you know, just incredibly vibrant use of color and movement, and I maybe I'm swayed by Marwin's work, but a lot of, you know, bird life, animal life, or its influences. It may not be directly represented, but that. And then I would just say also the other place to me where, and Marwin also represents this, besides Crow Shadow and the Institute of American Indian Arts, which is putting a lot of more energy around printmaking than it has for years, but it's putting even more, is all of the places in the US where Native printmakers are also university professors in schools of art. So John Hancock and Emily Arthur and Marwin and others. And so I think it's incredibly exciting, because I think more and more artists who are working various media will also work in print. So
Thank you for that. And we have, I don't know, we're past time. So we have one question in the chat, which I can throw out there if everybody has a minute. Okay. It says, what are the advantages to printing sheen collé, and why are printmakers drawn to this technique? Or anyone.
Well, I think in our studio, you know, Wendy Red Star worked with photographic imagery. Natalie Ball works with sculptural assemblages. So it's just a quick way to have those kind of elements be drawn into the prints as well, so that it has conversation with their other works.
Yeah, I would agree as an artist, the accessibility to the message behind the print, and it just serves like you're not explaining, it's immediate, and and also it just adds to the complexity of the layering.
Yeah, and like Emily Arthur came with a box of vintage postcards, and she wanted to incorporate one of those postcards into her prints. And it's like, you know, we don't need to reproduce that postcard via print. Like there's no reason for me to do a CMYK 4-color run on top of a print when I can, you know, print a beautiful archival digital image on a fine art paper and it looks gorgeous, you know, so.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, yeah, every single print that you guys showed throughout the presentation was so technically layered and visually layered, and also the narrative was really layered. So, I mean, it's just a lot of levels of conceptual thinking and technical sort of prowess that is just really unique to the prints that are produced at Crow's Shadow. And I'm so glad that we had this panel. Each of you brought such a wonderful perspective and helped all of us learn so much more about what you do. And I'll turn it over to Jenny to close us out, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed that. Next time I'm road tripping to the West Coast, I'm going to try and stop in Pendleton.
I think we all will.
Yeah. So thank you, Galina, Elisa, Judith, Carl, Rebecca, and Marwan. And thank you all for joining us today and over the past 2 weeks. These online programs are really near and dear to our hearts. They are a lot of work, but we're honored to have the opportunity to create these oral histories and virtual studio visits with so many of the legendary members of our communities. And we look forward to seeing you all in New York at the Javits Center, where we will be continuing our Print Month programming in person at the IFPDA Print Fair, October 27th to the 30th. See you soon.